I make a motion, we accept the meeting minutes of April 15th as written.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, John. Any discussion of the motion on the table? Hearing none, I will do a roll call vote. Mary Ann?
Aye.
Mike Bouchard?
Aye.
Mike Ahern?
Aye.
Steve Whitman?
Abstain.
Sue Wood?
Aye.
Oh, my order keeps changing. John, did I call you yet?
Nope. Aye.
John, and did I miss anybody? I will vote aye as well. All right. I will turn it over to June. Do we have any communications?
Nope. Actually, next thing on the agenda was public comments. We sometimes try to, have, in case
Oh.
anybody's here that wants to comment on something.
Yes.
We don't have any public hearings tonight, so we try to in the beginning of the meeting and at the end have a chance for people to comment. So
Are there any members of the public who would like to offer comments to the planning board at this time? I see a few non-voting members on the list. Would be welcome any comments or concerns that you'd like to bring to the planning board at the time. No, seeing Zach shaking his head. I can't see Bill shaking his head, but he's quiet. So I hope, thumbs up, got it. Thank you, Bill. All right, hearing none. Let's move on to communications, but did you say we had none?
we did not have any.
All right. And are there any committees to receive reports from? Don't believe so.
Sure, so the parking committee met, we
great.
meet every other week. Actually, we will be presenting our plan or our proposal, thoughts, whatnot, to the select board on Monday concerning changes to what we propose to be charging for the meters, an upgrade, actually putting a new app on people's phones. They can do that and pay their parking that way. Just some additional changes that we were proposing. Steve Lefebvre, Chief Lefebvre, and his team has really been leading that charge. So from the select board, the biggest conversations right now kind of go around the armory and what happens to the armory when the National Guard leaves. The town has an understanding that if the land comes back to us, the folks at the armory have a different opinion. So we're kind of going through that right now. And PSU made a presentation. Finals are obviously have been happening this week. Graduation tomorrow night as well as Saturday morning. And the plan is to reopen fully in the fall. Those are about the highlights.
Thank you. Perfect. All right. Moving on to new business. The first item on our agenda is election of officers, and we do have 3 offices for the planning board that we need to fill. One is the chair, one is the vice chair, and then we also have a non-recording secretary that are defined in our rules of procedure, our bylaws. So I would like to start with the position of chair, since it seems to be the most important. And I believe we all received a message via email from Rebecca that she has stated her willingness to continue in that role as chair. So let's start the discussion there, and we can entertain motions or discussion at this point if anyone would like to contribute.
I would make a motion to nominate Rebecca as chair of the planning board.
Thank you, Steve. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mary Ann. I guess we have a motion on the table. I'd like to make sure that Carl gets in on this actually, but I think that considering that we already started the motion, we should probably move forward with the alternates that are seated. Carl, can you hear adequately this time?
Yeah, finally I got the sound back again. I have no idea where it went, but it's back.
Okay, No, we were trying to get you to get your response during the roll call, and we didn't hear from you. So we did seat an alternate in your place for now.
That makes sense.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there discussion? All right, hearing none. Let's do a roll call vote. John,
Aye.
Mike Ahern,
Aye.
Mike Bouchard,
Aye.
Marianne,
Aye.
Carl. Oh, sorry, Carl's a non-voting member. We just went through that. Sue
Aye.
and Steve.
Aye.
And I will vote aye as well. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up with the alternates and apologize. All right, next office is the vice chair. I have been vice chair. I would be willing to continue, but if somebody else wants to take a seat, this is the time to speak up.
I would make a motion that Phil Lamoureux continue as vice chair of the planning board.
Thank you, Steve. We have a motion on the table.
I will
I'll
second
second
that.
that.
No.
You can have it, John.
All right, thanks, John. Any discussion? All right, hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. John,
Aye.
Mike Ahern,
Aye.
Sue Wood,
Aye.
Mike Bouchard,
Aye.
Steve Whitman,
Aye.
Marianne,
Aye.
and I will abstain. And then for the office of non-recording secretary, I'm not sure who was in this position last year, honestly. We didn't. Maybe we should bone up on our record keeping, but we'll have it in our minutes for next time. Are there any volunteers? Anyone who would like to express interest? It should be a member of the board at this point.
May I actually ask a question?
Sure.
I'm sure I'm looking at the bylaws and find out what is a non-recording secretary.
So I will read the non-recording secretary will assume the duties of the vice chair in the absence of either the chair or the vice chair. And in the absence of both the chair and the vice chair, the non-recording secretary will assume the duties of the chair and shall have full powers of the chair on matters that come before the board during the absence of the chair and the vice chair. So it's kind of third in line. So.
I think John would be great if John would be willing to do it.
I'd be willing. I mean, I haven't been here very long, but if I'd accept.
Is that a motion?
I will make a motion that John be the non-recording secretary for the planning board.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Sue. We have a motion and a second to nominate John to be the non-recording secretary. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll do a roll call vote. John,
I'll abstain.
Mike Ahern,
Aye.
Sue Wood,
Aye.
Mike Bouchard.
Aye.
Thank you. Steve Whitman,
Aye.
Marianne Barnsley,
Aye.
and I will vote aye as well. So condolences to our electees. And let's move on to item 7B, which is, June, do you want to introduce the volunteer for the alternate position on the Commission for the Lakes Region Planning Commission?
Sure. So Town of Plymouth is a member of the Lakes Region Planning Commission, and they have a board of commissioners, which is really, I believe, made up by representatives from each community within the region. Bill Bolton, who I think is on here, is the town's official commissioner to LRPC, but they tend to meet on Monday evenings that conflict quite often with the select board meetings. So Bill cannot always attend. So this happened the last week or two. And then I also have to go to the meetings quite a bit, you know, the select board meetings. So we just thought it would be good to see if a planning board member might be willing to be sort of a backup alternate member is to be able to, go and if Bill has a conflict. So it may not be every time, but I believe the meetings are open anyway. It seems like the agendas, I looked at, I think I sent you guys the website for their meeting information, so you can kind of get a sense of what they do. But it is like maybe once a month on Mondays, I think. So in the evening.
I was going to nominate Mary Ann, but I think we'd have the same issue.
I know, I was gonna jump in there, but you had me, Phil.
My schedule's pretty full these days. I know that I wouldn't be able to get there for the next month or two, but is anybody else interested? Steve, is that too close to your work? Yeah, I can understand that.
Well, another option might be is, and we can always, if there's a conflict sometime and Bill can't go, and then he lets us know, we can kind of send out an email to the board and see if somebody can jump in and do it if they have time. Otherwise, or I could go. I mean, we'll see, kind of play it by ear if somebody isn't ready to commit, unless we can find somebody else in the town too. It doesn't have to be a planning board member. It just seemed like the logical thing.
Are there any members of the zoning board that would be well-versed in planning background to fill that role?
Yeah, I didn't ask the zoning board. We can ask, certainly we can try. I haven't asked them yet.
Is Brian on the zoning board?
Brian Murphy?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. Sorry. Steve?
I would add that they can be interesting events and they give you a bigger perspective than just Plymouth to, connect with other board members from other towns, hear about other initiatives that we may or may not want to consider. So it can be really informative. I don't know if it has to be, does it have to be a full board member or could it be an alternate? So, but if that helps sway anybody to maybe go to a couple a year, they are good. I don't think I sold this, Phil, sorry.
It's okay.
Maybe we can just play it by ear. It looks like Bill's trying to join in, so maybe he's got something, maybe he's trying to call in on his phone because I see his name there. Seems like people are having connection issues tonight, but so perhaps we can, again, oh, there's Bill in case he had anything to offer to it.
Bill, what are your thoughts on this? You're still in mute currently.
You're muted, Bill.
I didn't want to speak anyway. So, yeah, I guess as far as like, it doesn't have to be like a full-blown member or an alternate or just anyone interested in actually attending the meeting and then getting back with minutes. So that's it.
Well, given that there's not anybody jumping up and down to do this, which I know we've had some long meetings too, so I can understand. Why don't we I can ask the zoning board if we want to find somebody that's a designated person, and then we'll keep looking, because maybe we can find somebody in the community or kind of rotate it around as needed, depending on on their schedule and the select board schedule. Okay.
That'll be good.
I could
Okay.
probably be on deck if there's nobody who comes up as a full-time alternate, but if there's a meeting or two that we might need to have someone go to, I'd be willing to put my name in that just for short term.
Okay.
All right.
All right. How about updates from June on planning and development updates for projects?
Yeah, just our meeting last couple weeks ago got lengthy, so I didn't have a chance to give some updates. So I think it's always good to try to just keep you guys posted on things. One update, which I also sent out, tomorrow is the last day to register for the Office of Strategic Initiatives Planning Zoning Conference, which is on Saturday, May 15th. Just a reminder about that. But more importantly, I had a couple things to just mention. Just about the Riverside Landing, because it was now a couple months ago where the planning board gave conditional approval. I have drafted the development agreement, and have not heard back from Mike McGinley, the owner of Riverside Landing, about that. So I think he's still waiting to get his alteration of terrain permit, and I know they did file that, and that can take a couple months. So I guess the one thing I probably need to reach out to him and just sort of say, what's going on? What's your plans? And, because I want to, that we had some timelines in there. I want to make sure that he's not missing something. So one of the other things I have put a bit of time into is the conservation easements for part of the wetlands permit for the proposed filling for the next phase that, you guys approved. The wetlands permit does require conservation of 2 neighboring parcels. We covered over that. So I did get from Riverside Landing's attorney the easement, which is really following DES's wetlands mitigation conservation easement format. Some of the text I think is a little bit outdated. So I did read through that pretty carefully, and then I scheduled a meeting with Lori Summer from Department of Environmental Services and their Wetlands Bureau, and had a nice time on a Zoom meeting with her to go over some of the areas I was asking, could we make some changes for some clarification about. And one of the things we did talk about, and she double checked on, so Riverside Landing's wetlands permit was supposed to get these easements in place by March 31st, I think it was. So they've missed that deadline, and she needed to look into had it been extended and what that meant. I know it didn't sound like a major hurdle because of the timing of everything, sometimes with the next set of permits from the town and the state. So anyway, I drafted my comments after that conversation with Lori from DES, and I sent them on to the attorney for Riverside Landing, and have heard nothing back. I also shared my comments with the Conservation Commission and did get a little bit of a pushback, but I want to make sure that in talking with DES, just for some clarity, that these conservation easements are for wetlands mitigation, and they are to protect the wetland areas that are, as compensation for the changes to wetlands as a result of the filling. So conservation easements come in many, many shapes and forms, and with a lot of different types of purposes to them. And I've got a fair amount of familiarity with conservation easements, and this one's pretty specific. The purpose of it is to protect habitat, wetland habitat, and the wetlands around this development. So there will be some limitations on recreational use. State is sort of requiring that, and because again, they were concerned about too much recreational use. Certainly, certainly bicycles, no motorized kind of uses, possibly some walking, but even trail building is a concern depending on where and might it go. There's really no structures, very, very limited type of use. It is open to the public, but it may not become like a real sort of recreationally developed area because again, the conservation purpose is to protect the wetlands there. So any kind of things that happen could interfere with that. Whatever these easements get, however we work out the final language with it, it does get approved needs to be reviewed by DES, the Attorney General's office, and the Army Corps of Engineers, because it's tied to their wetlands permit. So there's still a number of steps to happen, and I'm kind of waiting now. In my regard, it's really for the applicant, Riverside Landing's attorney, to take the comments I have and work them into a new document. Then we'd have take another look at it, and eventually have the town attorney look at it, and then it would go back to DES and on through. So it's going to be a bit of time still, I think, before we have that worked out. So that was kind of my update on that one. So if anybody's got questions, jump in and ask, please. Aroma Joes, just this week, I think earlier this week, or maybe end of last week, Mike Vignali, our town's engineer, did finally review the change. We'd had a few changes to the plan. So one of the conditions was that he had to approve those changes, and he signed off on that. So we've got a couple of waiting for just the final set of plans for everything to be kind of worked in on for Aroma Joes. And I also had the development agreement drafted and sent to the applicant, but they were going to have their attorney look at it, and I have not heard anything back. I did hear that somebody said that there was some trucks out there the other day, but there's been no activity. It was just probably somebody taking a look at the site or something, maybe for the upcoming work. One thing that I've been very busy with is working on, under the direction from the select board, the decision that the town made was to go ahead and apply to Northern Borders Region Commission for some grant funding. It's a very competitive process. We'll throw our application in and see what happens, but the decision was made last Monday night to really continue on with the idea of trying to get some funding for another phase of work on below Main Street on what we call Railroad Square. For decades, there's piles in my office of trying to sort out what the right of way is through there. It's believed that the town doesn't have a full right of way through there. So in essence, that's not a town road, even though there's been some recent development down there. The drainage has fallen apart. We learned that in particular, there was an engineering report done last fall, finished in December, looking at all the stormwater drainage that has helped lead to the EDA grant that we got for the replacement of Main Street. So really the next phase of kind of working on the infrastructure there logically is Railroad Square, and it's been talked about for a long time. So it's a good place, I believe, for us to try to work on next. Whether the application will be successful, certainly we don't know. Again, it's going to be very competitive. I did have a meeting with some of the business owners, property owners in that area last Friday. Got a bit of a pushback, to be honest, which was fine. Some of what they were saying was nobody had reached out to them yet and blah, 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 that kind of thing. And so I don't want to discount what their concerns were. And I've had a conversation with a couple more people by phone this week. I certainly respect their comments on it. But again, this has all moved fairly fast, and doing our best. I guess my message, if you hear things, I want everybody to understand just publicly that we're doing our best to reach out to people. And with COVID, obviously having a big meeting is hard. So, and it does take some time to really have a good conversation to explain what we're trying to do. It's not to build a road. It won't be enough money to do that. It's really to get the design and engineering going, and hopefully maybe do a bit of construction to repair some of the drainage, but not a full roadway. It's just not going to be enough money. It's going to be, it'd be an expensive project, but we would then know what what's possible, and have some better sense of what it would cost. So then in the future, a couple of years out, we could apply for another grant, and the town would probably have to kick in 20% or so at that time, and move ahead that way. And we expect there's going to be a lot of good infrastructure funding coming. So it certainly makes sense to get this kind of designed and shovel ready, so we can reach out for be ready for the next opportunity. It's really kind of a kind of a phased approach. You got to figure out first what you're going to do, and then go and do it, so trying to explain all that can take at least a half an hour if you let me get going on that as I meet with different property owners. So I just wanted to share that, because I know that some people are expressing concern, and rightly so, that there's been a lot of talk over the years, nothing's ever happened. And I'm like, well, now this is the chance to help get something to happen. If we can get a few $100,000s of dollars, hopefully, to really do some good work down there, to figure out how to lay out a road and what it would cost, and really look at all the infrastructure, and make a better, safer pathway through there. Whether it be 1 lane or 2, I don't know. I mean, that would come later on. Hopefully we could get some parking in there too to support businesses. So
can I ask a question about, so if there's no roadway there now, presumably there are lots without frontage? Doesn't the town have, would that be treated like a lot on a class 6 road in terms of obtaining a building permit if there's no frontage? I know that there were permits issued in the past, but I'm wondering, if someone were to come forward, would that still be the correct decision to issue a building permit if there's no frontage on those lots?
Yeah, and certainly there's not whatever is there. You can drive through there down to, depending on the day, and if you want to take a turn, go down what they call Napa Alley, that little pitch. Depending if you got a big truck, maybe you can make it. Get a high clearance vehicle, maybe you can make it. And then south of that, it's gravel, dirt. I think somebody was stuck in the mud down there recently, from what I heard. I almost got stuck in the winter down. I was like saying, I can go drive through there. I'm like, no, you can't.
Is that the area that comes up by the skate park and the pump track?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And anyway, so there's complexities of ownership there. It's a very, if you really look hard and zero in on the tax map, it does show some really interesting strips that are probably old railroad land. Yes, there are some lots down there. Whether they truly have frontage on a town approved road, it depends on which lot we're talking about, but there's definitely, that's one of the concerns, it's not a real safe passageway through there. And there's enough business and housing activity down there to be a concern for the town. So I think you're right. It can be considered sort of like a unapproved Class 6 road, only it's in our downtown.
Right.
Class 6 roads are usually out in the hinterlands, so
Yeah.
if we were really to look at, had somebody really wanted to do something more down there, I think that would open up that question. We'd have to dig into a little bit more about what easements the town may have or who's got what's very complex. And I'm not an attorney, so we'd have to kind of get into it with the town's attorney to kind of get better guidance, I think, because it is a weird issue in there. So,
Thank you.
but again, that's one reason why I feel like we need to kind of figure it out. That makes sense.
Right.
Keep getting somebody here, Mark's iPhone trying to connect, so I'm hoping that's Mark's.
Yeah,
speaking.
I've seen that as well too.
Anyway, all right. I think that's pretty much it for my updates, unless anybody's got questions, other things I've been working on. It's been busy. Oh, I know what the last thing to mention, probably most important. So Brian Murphy, he had officially retired as a, full-time and had been staying on part-time. He finished last week, end of April. So Scott Whedon had already pre-planned a vacation this week. So we've been without a building inspector, code enforcement person this week, but Scott will be back on Monday and is going to be around really probably 4 days a week roughly. And, has been overlapping with Brian to kind of understand what's kind of in the works and what's going on. And I think we'll have a little bit more time than we've had recently. And as I've gotten to know Scott, he seems very knowledgeable about getting things going for jumping in for the building inspecting code enforcement. So Scott Whedon, he lives right in town too. So
That's well, I don't mean to keep you on the hook here, but moving away from
yeah.
from updates, are you ready to go into zoning and zoning ordinances?
Yeah, I'm of course I love talking about zoning. John's laughing. It is kind of interesting in a way as a planner, but I guess I'm sort of fumbling here because I made more slides and that sort of in this format, it seems like the best way to try to share some information. Some of them are very text heavy, so forgive me on that, but I'm going to jump in and try to share my screen then. And if you can bear with me and some more PowerPoint slides. I mean, I got good feedback last time for people thinking it was helpful. So,
Yep.
But please let me know if I get too lectury on some of this stuff. I'm actually going to do it this, yeah, let's see. Okay. Maybe I'll change my mind here. So some of these slides I took what we went over, actually it was a whole long month ago, April 1st, just as a reminder about some of the areas where I've been really kind of digging in to look at the zoning ordinance, to think about what is not working, and then really asking the planning board to consider. I know, we obviously we've had some discussion about changes to the zoning ordinance that were being proposed, and then really trying to look at different zones. But my suggestion to you guys is that it'd be better in the shorter term to look at some of these administration parts, because on a day-to-day basis, the zoning ordinance causes us to lose a lot of time as we're trying to figure it out. We'll never have it perfect. There's always lots of room for interpretation, but I think there's just a lot of conflicts in there. So I wanted to I touched on some of these things a month ago. I've done a little bit more work on them, but I just wanted a little bit of direction in some areas about potential issues that may be out there to also consider it and kind of prioritize or not. And I don't want to take on more work than necessary, be pushing things, but again, land uses change over time, and I'll explain a couple things as we go along here. So I told you about this before, especially definitions, conformity, the general provisions section in particular. It's just really difficult to work with. I showed you this before. I haven't really added more terms. I've got notes, basically what I would say is, I think the best thing for, if you're okay with this, is to have myself and Jules kind of work on gathering up some new definitions, some adjustments, and just start working on this, and not boring you every month with, hey, here's a new definition for one thing or another. But we lack definition of some types of uses, and there's areas that I think need revision. So I've got everybody minimized here, but if anybody has any, to me, this is an area that needs some work, and it's pretty straightforward. So I don't want to waste too much time with the planning board until we kind of have a whole list to go over maybe this fall. All right, so that's kind of my game plan on that, if that's all right. So again, there's an awful lot of text in this slide. I showed you most of this last month. Non-conformity really means something that was previously allowed and was legal at some point, either prior to zoning being adopted, which I think was in 1969, I think in Plymouth, or as it's gotten amended, it may have been conforming at one point and then no longer became conforming. So you can have uses, structures, and lots. So this section of 405 is what we talk about, and it never really addresses non-conforming lots. And a non-conforming lot could be, if the lot size is 1 acre, that's required, and we have areas where lots may be less than 1 acre if there's not enough frontage by the current standards of the zoning ordinance. So you can have, what do you do with a lot that isn't the right size or shape? In addition, we can have uses that are no longer permitted. We can have structures that don't fit within the setbacks. We can have parking areas not in that are encroach into setback areas. So we have this text, but basically I'd like to work a little bit more with it and create a new, kind of take the whole section on non-conformity and just rewrite it, basically define it better. And the general idea between non-conforming is long, because it was legal at some point and the zoning changed to make it not legal. So basically in general, the approach to non-conforming is saying you can continue to have them. All right. So if you have a use, you can continue it. That's the general idea. But you do need to think about abandonment. And currently we have something around these lines, but again, it's kind of confusing. So in general, you sort of think about like, if you have a non-conforming use, say like a business operating in a residential zone that wants to continue, and it may be fine, but then eventually it gets discontinued, and then you say, okay, if it goes for about a year without being operating, then it kind of loses that chance you can't just pick it up and start it again. You can't. So that sometimes comes around. So that's typical for communities to say, usually around a year. Abandonment means you kind of lose the non-conforming status. You'd have to get a variance, say. All right. So this is where the town's text, I'm trying to make a few suggestions to you why this is difficult to look at. Because this point we have in the ordinance something that says basically you want to be able to say you can't make it any bigger. You can't really expand the building. You can't really make it more intense or have more employees, or you can't change it to another different non-conforming uses. That's typical to state. We had this thing that says if it's permitted, change to a use that's permitted in which it's located for 3 months, it can't go back. But really that would be abandonment of the non-conforming use. And then later the ordinance says if it's abandoned for more than a year, then you lose it. So do we want to go to 3 months or a year? That was the other question. Most cases, I think most communities would say a year, but our ordinance kind of says these two things in the same place, basically. So I kind of went with the more stringent one, but I'm thinking a year would be fine too. So those might be decisions for you guys to think about when we get ready to make these types of amendments. All right. Again, the devil's in the details, I guess.
So hard to come up with examples where these would apply in
yeah, it's a little hard to
until you see one.
Yeah, I'll have to try to think about finding something that might be a good example of it. But in general, if you think about something that could have been like a store in an old neighborhood or something, that the old store that was on Highland Street that I think was single family and then got abandoned, and then somebody at one point asked could they pick it up again years later. So
I was also going to say, if you have a structure that's used seasonally, I was wondering if that would also make the 3-month rule difficult to actually deal with.
yeah, I mean, I think a year would be fine in many cases, but what we have now is conflicting, you know, it sort of basically says two different things. So it looks like Matt Yeton is here and has his hand raised. If you want to let him speak, Phil, or at this point, or
I don't mind as long as we can fit it in. Matt, do you have comments here that you'd like to contribute? Questions?
Yeah, I just have a question, and I'm here to learn and help decipher things myself.
Sure.
So if a person had a 1 acre lot, and then there were changes made where you could only build on a minimum of a 3 acre lot, that would then be like a non-conforming lot, correct? Like if something like that happened, does that make sense?
correct.
Although there's a distinction there, because minimum lot sizes only apply to the creation of new lots.
Okay.
So you couldn't, you know, if there is an area, like let's say you're in an area where there's an existing 1 acre lot and the zoning is currently at 3 acres or something like that. I mean, it is non-conforming in that manner, but there are prescribed ways you can still use non-conforming lots, but it does get hairy quickly.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So
That was-
there's, when you think about non-conforming, this is where there's uses, structures, and lots. So if we just kind of started talking about the uses, but I realized we've got lots here on the slide. So yeah, structures are typically something that sits within a setback area oftentimes, or might be too tall or too big or something. But in general, most of the cases, it might be encroaching into the setback. So the idea is that you basically can allow and make it bigger on the side that's not encroaching, but you can't make it encroach anymore. All right.
Okay.
For structures, but then asking specifically about non-conforming lots, we don't really have anything that says about non-conforming lots. And we recently, well, a couple months ago, had a question about, could somebody take some frontage from they own 2 lots and they could take frontage to want to do a boundary line adjustment and increase the frontage on the non-conforming lot, but not enough to make it fully conforming. It was like, well, we don't really say, so I guess you're making a non-conforming lot less non-conforming, but it's not yet conforming.
Yeah, we've dealt with it. I want to say that I'm not sure, but there might be something in our zoning ordinance that maybe I've seen it in other towns. Some towns have a regulation that says if a single owner of 2 non-conforming lots, or if there are 2 non-conforming lots owned by a single owner, they must be merged.
Yeah. So hold that thought. That's, I think, on my next slide. So we do have something about that currently, but I threw in here, you know, some of the text here in italics as my ideas. You know, and I don't think it necessarily has to be by special exception. If somebody wanted, you know, why make a trip to the zoning board if you're making something less non-conforming? I don't know, but there might be a time. So again, this is not set in stone. We need to think about this stuff. So I'm just trying to put some ideas out there. But possibly that part about you going to get a special exception, maybe we just let it happen. It doesn't happen a lot. So yeah, I think this is what you're talking about, Phil. We do have a statement in section 401.2 that says existing lots of record that a building can be built on a non-conforming lot. So if it requires an acre, or if our zoning, you know, says 3 acres and you only as Matt was suggesting, and you only have 1 acre, you could still build on it. All right, provided you meet the setbacks. That doesn't get you out of it. We do have this statement that says but it's just really poorly worded. It basically says, what is it? No structure can be built if the owner owns adjacent vacant land, which can be combined.
Yeah.
But if the non-conforming lot is vacant and the neighboring lot isn't, then you know, it kind of implies one thing or another. So, and it's really easy to change, you know, you could just put the name of the lot into an LLC, or just change it from, I know, a couple, you know, if I had that, I could just put the ownership of the neighboring lot into my husband's name, and then we kind of both still own it and build another house on it, and then, you know, kind of get away with it. So I don't know if that adjacency is really that important. I mean, it kind of, there may be cases where we allow better infill to allow people to build on existing non-conforming. Again, it's something to consider. But basically, you know, I was just trying to clean up this language, because the third bullet here, it just doesn't make sense to me, that says basically you could be within 15 feet of either side, or less than 10 feet, but who gets to decide? It doesn't give any clarity.
Yeah, that's muddy.
That second bullet, I was just thinking, basically any new structure on a non-conforming lot has to conform to the setbacks like any other structure, and give people the right to build on a non-conforming lot. This came up recently. We had a question about a small lot on a street off of Fairgrounds that's vacant, and could somebody build on it? So, and then trying to read this through is like, what is, it says one thing here and another. So that's the kind of thing that we sort of stumbled over, and the person looking at it was calling several phone calls to try to get advice about it as they were trying to determine what they should do. So,
If I can interject here, I really, it's interesting for me. I don't know if the board has time, but maybe in their free time, like the sections 404 and 405 are really interesting in dealing with, like, how we deal with non-conforming uses and abandonment. But the one that I find particularly interesting is 4057. So if there's a non-conforming structure where there's a fire, the use can be continued if the house is reconstructed on the same footprint within a year. So, and it makes me think, the only situation I can think of is there was an older home on Pleasant Street that burned, and it was over a year ago. So they're probably outside of the window. If it was non-conforming, they can no longer build in that non-conforming location. But, that's an interesting one that comes up from time to time too.
yeah. And maybe after a fire, we say 2 years or something, might be another place to give people an opportunity
Right.
to have, I don't know. Again, we can't, but there was also statements in there that if somebody does have a home ruined by fire, there's a certain timeline to clean it up, and
Right.
then you should kind of make some plans to do something, assuming that somebody has the resources to do it. So,
Right.
And you can, again, build on it. You might just have to use a different footprint and different foundation or that kind of thing. So,
Right.
So again, this is, unless I'm hearing any major concerns, I'd like to find ways to, these are sort of some examples of why this is so confusing and time consuming at times. All right.
I would like to encourage you to put as many of these suggestions
Okay.
forward for us as possible, just because I've seen some of these myself, and I think that anything you can do, these are changes to the zoning ordinance. So if we're going to change them, we should probably put all of our corrections together into one document.
Yeah, we kind of have this whole section about general provisions, and that's kind of and it's just poorly organized too. There's kind of, you
Right.
flip around the pages a lot, so we'll work on that. Accessory structures comes up a lot. Again, I'm thinking that we have this area where we say no structure can occupy any part of a yard. That's why you have setback areas. But then we say it could be in the yard by special exception, and those kind of conflict. So basically just taking out that state, sometimes it's just removing something that kind of, the first part of that red text doesn't really allow you to follow to the next. Basically it says, no, you can't do it. Then it's like, yes, you can do it by special exception. It's one or the other, really. Because accessory structures are structures. So you're saying no structures can go in the setback. So just kind of clarity about that.
Right.
There's other parts about fences. This is one I still need to put some more work, so please bear with me on this, because I just still not quite sure what the town was hoping to do with some amendments a few years ago about fences. We basically call fences over 4 feet high a structure, an accessory structure, but then we say that they have to be basically with this bit about that structures aren't supposed to be in the yard, but then we say it's a type of structure, but it's not supposed to be in the yard. It's just all kind of messy. So what I'm trying to figure out is, do we want to basically set some requirements around fences in the cutoff of 4 feet, 6 feet, maybe less than 6 feet, you can do it. Maybe more than between 4 and 6, you need a special exception. Maybe over 6, you can't put it in an area. So again, I'm not coming up with the answer yet for any of this, or a real solid proposal for you guys. But these are things that as you this summer, as you're out and about in town, start looking at fences. What makes sense? There's a lot of fences too. When should you have to have a building permit to put up a fence, and where can you put it on? If it's a privacy fence, kind of that bit along your property line, you'd need a special exception to do that if it's over 4 feet.
This is universal through town too. So if someone wanted to put up more of a robust security fence in the commercial zone, that would also be a problem. I mean, if somebody
Right.
wanted an 8 or a 10-foot fence,
Yeah.
around an auto salvage yard, or something that they want to protect, that would also be a challenge. So I wonder if we want to look at zone specific standards for fences even.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about that today as I was working on this, that it isn't necessarily, residential neighborhoods versus businesses would have different needs for fences and different purposes for them.
Yeah.
All right. And certainly agricultural areas too, you should definitely get kind of a pass if it's for fencing to keep your animals in. That's a different use of it. And I
Yeah.
believe that there's some state guidelines on that too. So yeah, we probably need to look at fencing by zone perhaps. That's good feedback. Thank you, Phil. Making a note of that. So again, please think about this stuff in the next couple months as as I work on trying to come up with some suggested answers. All right. So this is another one that I believe was fairly recently changed by the community, by the town. And this, I've had a little bit of trouble interpreting this yellow part that in our more business kind of areas, there was this idea that you could have more than one business, I think was the intent, on a lot. And I believe it kind of came about with the Riverside Landing because Riverside Landing has Market Basket, the liquor store, as two major businesses. I believe that's all it's on the actual Riverside Landing property. But now you've approved a filling area that's in essence is what's the definition of a building pad? That does not exist in the definitions.
Right.
So if you think of a building pad as depends on sort of the definition you look at it. Does it need a foundation in place? Can it just be a filled and flattened and ready to go kind of site? But is this really saying you can only have one building per pad or one business per pad? It kind of, you look at it 1 minute and then, so I think just some rewording. And my sense, and I guess I wanted some feedback, was that the town was hoping to find ways to allow multiple businesses in these specific zones, maybe on separate buildings. So you could have, multiple businesses and multiple buildings on one lot. But that may not be what this really says unless we work with that definition of what a building pad is.
I was going to say, can we just strike on a single building pad from that? And because there may be multiple businesses within one structure, and there be maybe multiple structures on one parcel.
Right. Yeah, like Hatch Plaza's got multiple businesses, and I guess somebody said that they actually has 2 buildings there, but it looks like at least one in my mind. I think of that as sort of.
There's a fence between them in that corner.
Yeah,
they're not actually connected.
Visually, it looks like they connect. So we have other spots on Tenny Mountain Highway where there's one building with multiple businesses in it by where is it 7-Eleven now, or US Cellular Store, where the liquor store used to be. That kind of one building with multiple businesses. But you could have those as separate buildings. So this, again, somebody was asking about this recently, and I was having a hard time interpreting it and deciding what to do, the way it's structured there. All right. So it sounds like my understanding is that the intent was to allow multiple businesses in multiple buildings on a lot. Was that the general sense you guys think?
Yeah, that's what Brian brought to us because of, as you said, Riverside Landing, but also someone was looking at an infill, like a building within the parking lot at Hatch Plaza.
Yeah.
And so we started to raise this question, and we were saying, like, why would we mind if there were additional buildings on a commercial lot like that? We wanted more density. But I can see the confusion of the language you highlighted.
Yeah.
I was actually, I think something like an Aroma Joes, like if you go to California, there are little coffee shops out in parking areas of bigger plazas like that. They're generally out towards the front where people don't park as much, but it wouldn't work here because you don't have the utilities there, but it's possible. There's a big chunk of parking at Hatch Plaza that rarely gets used that could support a small drive-through coffee shop or something.
Okay.
along those lines.
We'll work on, as a fun fact, I guess Brian was telling me that years ago, there was like, you remember the old photo mats that used to be
Yeah.
in parking lots?
Yeah.
We date ourselves if we remember those. Anyway, that's
Forgot about
always,
those.
I wish if anybody has a picture of the photo mat that used to be in the Hatch Plaza, I'd love to see it. Okay, this is parking. This is something that I've thought about for years, and we've had a lot of discussion over time. And we took some pictures the other day of some sites, went a little walk around town, Jules and Brian and Scott and I, and then we can't find the cord to download the pictures from, and I couldn't find an app to do it. So I didn't have a nice picture, but I will get one sooner or later. If you look around, mainly in some areas, in our neighborhoods, single family neighborhoods closer to downtown, we have, a variety of types of residents in certain homes and rental units. We have a number of homes that I believe are single family, and they have one kitchen, one kind of set up for, and they may be rented to multiple people. We have a restriction that no more than 3 unrelated people can be in a home or in a dwelling unit. But so you can have one small house with 3 people living in it sharing a kitchen, but that typically means 3 cars. So now a lot of these homes are smaller lots, very small driveways. And what's happened, if you really look, as you walk around, there's a lot of places where people are just parking on the grass, dirt regularly. In some cases, they're just driving over the sidewalk, jumping the curb because our curbs aren't in great shape in some cases, and are causing damage to curbs and creating a wider opening. In some cases, they're parking like right in front of between the house and the driveway, the road and the sidewalk and the porch. I've seen that over on High Street. There's a couple, it's just not what this is really intended to kind of help conserve and preserve our single family zone, to be really designed for that. So, but the problem is this has been always in there that you basically we're said that you can't park on the grass or dirt unless you are in the single family zone. I just feel like if we find a way to better word this, that section 411.5 was really designed to try to protect, if you have a family gathering, your family can come over, your friends, you can have a party and have friends over for a birthday party, and everybody can just kind of get off the street and temporarily for the afternoon park on the lawn. That's not what we're trying to prevent. It's the permanent, kind of longer term, day by day in these areas that are, that are really, really eating away at the town's infrastructure, the sidewalks really. Is the main concern. And it's dangerous when they're just backing onto the roadway. So I'd like to think about a way to just change some of this wording to see what we can do and talk to some of the landlords to say, hey, we're going to start trying to enforce this a bit more, because the intent, it may not be as apparent in the summer months as in other times a year.
If can I add something?
Yeah.
One thing to keep in mind here, just from what I've noticed, I think this should be thought about in conjunction with the amount of non-permeable space on each plot, because I also see houses that want lots of extra parking spaces, and they pave almost the entire property, which also has a real downside. So they somehow need to be balanced.
The other thing I'd like to, when I think about the neighborhood I live in, in the downtown area, there are a lot of homes that were built with either a single wide driveway or a single car garage with a single lane driveway and no room to park. So, I'm thinking about my neighbors, and the majority of families that are in homes in my area that have single car garages are parking on the lawn because they need, most people have 2 vehicles, and people, it's most common to have 2 people working in homes these days, and not everyone, but there are a lot of homes that there are a lot of single family homes throughout town that this is going to affect if we have to enforce this uniformly.
Yeah, and I certainly am aware of that, and I think it's just trying to figure out a way to
right.
And I'll try to get some pictures. It may be a little harder right now so we can get them off this camera. Kind of trying to find a better way to address more quality parking in single family dwelling units, and try to have a way where we can, from a code enforcement point of view, try to prevent parking just in that front yard, or even, you know, on a regular basis when all of a sudden it turns into 5-6 cars on a fairly regular basis. Okay. So again, I don't necessarily have the answer to it, but we'll work on it if that's all right. And Matt's got his hand raised again. It looks like this is hard to manage.
Thank you for letting me speak again. And I know this is just an ongoing discussion, but what problem is trying to be solved? Is it like damage to the town's infrastructure, like curbing, or does it have to deal with aesthetic looks as well? You know, when you drive by a house and you see 9 cars parked up on the lawn and it just doesn't look good. Or is it a combination of both, I guess, would be my question. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, Phil, if you want.
Yeah,
I think that's a really, anytime we look at these changes, that's a really good way to look at what are we trying to solve. Certainly the damage to the town's infrastructure is one. Safety, you know, for the backing onto the road is another. That trying to in minimizing that width that somebody has for kind of a curb cut. That's another way to kind of look at controlling this. But another factor is it's another indicator of occupancy, I think. And if when it's on a regular week after week, a kind of a chaotic parking situation that starts to deteriorate the neighborhood. And it kind of is an indicator that there may be multiple people beyond the 3 or 4 unrelated that may be allowed to be in there.
Okay.
And so it's kind of another way of us sort of getting at that problem, right?
All right. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. A couple other raised hands here. Mike and
Okay.
June, since you're,
Mike Ahern has his hand up, so.
go ahead, Mike. Thank you
Okay.
for putting
Thanks,
it in.
Phil.
Sure.
So I would encourage us on the planning board, when we're looking at issues like that, to find out who are going to be the most affected. Like Phil mentioned, parking in his neighborhood. And those are the types of people, if we're talking about changing in the residential area. I'm assuming you live in the residential district, I'm not sure. But bring in some people from the residential neighborhood to talk about that, or other zones. And I know that the landlords are very invested in the community. And when we're talking about parking, they're the ones that would have the most input and probably some really good ideas on overuse of the lawns for parking. And that would be a really good starting point, I would think, to get their input.
All right.
I
I'm
was
making
also
some.
wondering if we're going to talk about like large driveways sometimes, as we see in the downtown area, if it's worth considering any rules about permeability.
Yeah, I think somewhere in the zoning ordinance, there is something that says about the amount of impervious surface. I don't remember if it's, I think it may be listed by different zones.
It
but that
is.
would
I'm
get
just-
at that.
I was just wondering if how that applies to a driveway that's made with a permeable surface.
Yeah, most driveways, even if they're gravel, are considered impervious. So, you know,
There's an impervious.
unless you're really using porous asphalt or porous pavers, I think that's. But I guess I don't want to get too caught up in this tonight too, but I guess there's good feedback on this. And I think, you know, having some illustrations, and certainly Mike, you're right, we need to talk to some people. Keep in mind that this is again about more in the single family zone, not the multifamily zone, where we have some higher density, some of the landlords, bigger buildings with it. We're talking about something different. And many of those have old site plans or special exceptions to allow some parking in a different configuration. So All right, I'm gonna just keep moving on.
Yeah,
So this
thanks,
is
Jen.
something, again, pardon, what?
Thank you.
Oh, the other couple things I mentioned before, things that have come up, I'm just kind of keeping some lists, again, keeping you guys informed. We've continued to have some issues or questions about storage containers. I mentioned that before. Storage units, I think that can fit under that terminology of commercial service. That's what we're kind of basing it on, but it probably needs some edits to that definition to bring in storage units, because I'm guessing that this wasn't really thought of as a use when that was written, probably in the 60s. And then recreational vehicle campgrounds, I had a conversation with somebody today that I'll get to, and then short-term rentals are the ones I wanted to sort of focus on. I'm not saying we need to do something about these. I'm just telling you they have been coming up in terms of phone calls and questions that we get. And in many ways, adding in more regulations, I'm not necessarily in favor of always, because there's also then a lot more enforcement that comes. So I'm trying to balance, like, we can't be out around the town. Our code enforcement time is limited. So we want to be careful we don't overtax, create things that we can't enforce, I guess, basically. I did get on my phone a couple pictures that I took just for some example. Again, I brought this up last month. Storage containers, we do allow temporary uses related to construction, but these types of things are popping up. We're seeing them everywhere. The top picture, no offense to Spear Memorial Hospital, my guess is inside that container is probably a lot of COVID related materials that the hospital needs. So that's probably a very unique situation. So I have no idea what's in there, but I do know that they've got another one, I think, where they've been doing the COVID testing. So all the COVID aside, just imagine this was at a business somewhere taking up parking. Okay. So we designate a certain number of parking spaces, and now you get these things in there. And another site, they're using it really as a retail, instead of building a shed and a structure that then would become potentially taxable by the town. And then we look at it through site plan review, impervious surface, setbacks. It's a lot easier and cheaper to drop these things in. They're typically put in parking areas or within setback areas, potentially. They just are kind of creeping up around town. I've seen them in residential yards. I drove by one, but I couldn't pull over and take a picture of the other day. So again, to have some kind of control over this would be a nightmare to enforce. I think we'd get some pushback from businesses that say, hey, this is a lot cheaper and easier than building a building. That's one reason why they're so popular. But I did look around a little bit, and again, there's a lot of text on this, but the town of Pittsfield is, I think, address this in one way. I'm not saying this is the way we have to do it, but here's an example. They give a definition of what it is, basically a certain type of container. And then they basically, they are regulating it mainly about aesthetics. They have that purpose statement there. And then they, say that they're only to use for storage. I mean, people do cut windows into them and put stovepipes out the top and live in them. So, the tiny house phase or whatever, you could put some kind of bathroom in it, I guess. Who knows? I mean, people are creative with this stuff. But basically, they're basically kind of saying that they can only be there for 12 months and they have to meet setbacks. So the idea is that they're temporary. And they are a little bit silent about taking over parking spaces. What they have here for districts is their districts, not ours. So don't get concerned about that, please. But so it's basically they're trying to say it for wanting to look at them. I do think when they become more, I did ask the assessor and I haven't gotten an answer back. I think they can, if they're there longer term, they can get picked up in assessing, but they aren't as valuable probably as a building. So think about this one, please, and we can try to adopt something like this if we want, or not. And I don't know if it's something we want to take on. And we can come back to this unless you've got great burning. Oh, and then here's they actually have a permit application. Oh, two people have their raised hands. Henry Ahern and Matt Yetten have their hand raised. But yeah, it's going to be time confusing. I mentioned these other things, and businesses may oppose it. So,
this is not something we're proposing right now. So I'm less inclined to entertain too many comments from the public at this point, although if we can keep them brief, I think we can have a couple of comments here. So I can't see whose hands are raised at this point. June, can
Oh,
you?
it's Henry and I think Henry Ahern and
Matt,
maybe it's Matt or maybe it's just Henry.
Henry, do you want to comment on this, on storage containers?
Sure. My comment on what's happening with these storage containers. They're being used. I'm presently looking at not for my location, but for to relieve some of the slaughter issues that we're having, or the processing issues more than slaughter. You can buy these things that are actually a processing plant in a box.
Yeah.
Which would be something set up. They're also building pretty fancy houses out of them. And storage in an agricultural use, where I am down here or as a workshop, is a pretty important thing. So that just, you start looking, these things are no longer just storage containers. They're being converted into, you just can't imagine what.
Right. Yeah.
So I'd hate to see them regulated to the point where people can't use them for whatever they're being used for.
I agree. I think, I think they're great for temporary uses. I think what we have to do is we need to figure out, when does a temporary use no longer be temporary, and when is it a permanent use that needs to be permitted as part of the site plan? And a 1-year permit for temporary use is not a big deal, but if the use is going to be longer than that, I would think that we could still require them to be put on a site plan as a new development,
I guess the other part of it is, they're getting creative, I guess, because you can put
Right.
kind of the more and more different uses you can put in a box and deliver them somewhere. It's kind of,
they're cheap and they're resilient. They're stackable. You can certainly stack them up multiple high. I mean, I think on shipping containers, they stack them like 15 high or something like that. So they're strong, but
and maybe we consider them to be accessories. Maybe it's the quickest way to do it was just say that they're a part, they put them into the definition of accessory structures, and they have to meet setbacks, because in essence, that's what they really are functioning as.
Yeah, I mean, you'd use it as you would a storage, a prefab storage shed that you put on cinder blocks in your yard.
Right.
Right.
So I think that that's the easy way out, but then we're making sure that they're kind of at least not filling up the yard area, which is happening a lot, or parking spaces, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That might be the simple way out. So
there are also, the definition of Pittsfield use. There are a couple places in town where there are tractor trailers parked with, that are logoed with a business logo, and it seems like they're being used for advertising. It could be storage, but it could be, an unregulated sign because it's on a tractor trailer box too.
okay. Keep
That's
thinking
just-
about this, and we'll come up with maybe some simpler things. So campgrounds, we obviously have had some, I guess I should have told Mr. Ferguson that we were going to have this on here, but it's not really directed at the recent proposal. This is something that has also come up in another way about glamping, this new kind of term that is out there. I had somebody call me today, and I don't know if it's a different site, or I couldn't tell because they wouldn't give me the location, but they were asking about what was allowed. Does the town allow this type of use? So we have this again, we need to kind of clean up some definitions that are probably a little bit archaic, and find it. So that's another piece under the definitions to work on. It'd be my suggestion. And we really, have this piece that we call outdoor. We don't really have a statement about where you can have a campground.
Right.
Believe it or not, we kind of considered the proposal we had as an outdoor recreation use, because that's really what it is. But this definition doesn't really fit it entirely. So that's another thing to consider. When we have a proposal for a campground of some type, is it allowed or not? And if it's going to have buildings, then what does that mean? And what is a structure? What is a building? All right. So I just wanted to mention that why these things are issued. I did just do a little Google search, found these couple images of this new kind of glamping. Glamorous camping is the was what Claire, where basically there's a structure, there's a tent platform, and then there's larger tents that are more canvas oriented. Like, you know, they're can fit over a nice bed and some furniture in them, perhaps. They usually are seasonal, obviously. They're not going to be something you stay in the winter. But I believe that there's one of these potentially being underway in Plymouth. You know, and my recommendation to the person that called and asked about it, and the person maybe a month ago that called and asked about, I don't know if it's the same one or not, was if we find out that it starts up as a commercial business, it would need to go through site plan review. And then at that point, we'd be addressing water, sewer, septic, you know, these things are probably, you know, just because of scenery, they could be along a riverfront. You know, what's the traffic access to these? Because like the bottom picture, you know, what is the ability to get an ambulance to a site like that if needed? Do we, you know, is that something, again, zoning's about protecting health, safety, and welfare. At the same time, this is a very emerging in the last few years, a very, you know, popular type of use. So we don't necessarily want to try to say you can't do that. It's just something, again, we'd have to be looking at and really thinking about what are the facilities available to depend, and every case will be different. All right. Do we get to tax those types of wooden platforms as an accessory structure, perhaps, that kind of thing. So I think we can best probably address these things as we have through site plan review, but we might need to work on the definition, and I had in the previous slides, of what we traditionally think of as a campground. Does that make sense?
I mean,
Because we are seeing this potentially.
in a way, it would. I mean, it's not a residential use, so I mean, by definition, it would need a site plan, right? And then
Right.
you know, they are structures, so if you're putting them in a floodway, it's still a structure. I mean,
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of things that do apply already, but
Yeah. So it probably, I'd have to go back and look if where it's permitted or not, where it's
Right.
maybe by special exception. So again, it's, you know, the world changes and our ordinances need to keep up. So
Can I just ask a quick question about these sorts of issues? So I was looking for language in the zoning ordinance and I couldn't find it. So when we have a proposal or a site plan that does not fall into one of our defined categories, do we default to a prohibitory reading of the zoning laws, where if we don't say you can't do it, it's okay? Or is there a gray area there? Like, what is our default for dealing with non-defined uses? And should that be
Um,
defined in the zoning ordinance?
yeah, you can't define everything. Zoning is generally listed, is thought of, the best way to say a structure of zoning ordinance is to say it's permissive. So you list everything that's allowed, because you can't list everything that's not allowed. It's impossible to say you can't do this, this, and this. So zoning ordinances get, you know, say you can do these things in this zone, or you can do these things in this other zone. So that's why we're saying it's permissive. So if it's not on the list, then it's not allowed.
Yeah.
And that's
So-
why you have to make some adjustments over time to address new types of uses, like storage containers, glamping, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, I asked because a few things have come up recently that didn't seem quite to be on our list of permitted uses. And
Yeah.
I was wondering, like, a permissive zoning ordinance might by default prohibit those. And we've kind of found flexible ways of bringing them in.
Yeah.
And I was just curious about the clarification. And yeah, thank you.
And that's why definitions become really important, to not have them too stringent, you know, to kind of say, kind of give a general sense of what do you mean by recreational, kind of outdoor recreation versus, you know, so that's why, you know, help us to make those determinations and those interpretations too. Okay. So, but again, I want to just remember that this kinds of stuff, I mean, there may be, you know, there's adding value to properties for taxing and assessing purposes too. So then the other one there's a couple more here I want to just go over. And I'm not necessarily saying we want to address this. The town of Conway was in the news recently for turning down a short-term rental ordinance, because they have a lot of short-term rentals in their community. And that by turning down the ordinance means that I guess they're no longer permitted, because they've been kind of operating, popping up everywhere. I did a quick search today on VRBO and Airbnb just to see what was in town. I didn't look into all of these. You guys can dig into them. I think some cases, it looks like we have some commercial sites that advertise their rooms in a hotel on these sites now, on VRBO and Airbnb. So don't look at these as all somebody's home, please. But there does seem to be some in town. You can do your own searching around for it, because I just wanted to see where they are. One of the issues that this has been in the planning literature a lot for a last few years. Basically they don't really fit in all zones. When owners, many communities try to regulate these things, saying that as long as the owner's there, they can rent out, the kind of that accessory dwelling unit or something on a short-term basis, but they have to be living there to have better control over it. Many kind of resort communities, there can be problems of large gatherings that cause traffic noise, trash. But the real concern in many communities is that somebody that buys a home for their own occasional use and then rents it out as a short-term rental, weekend types uses, can really hit the availability of housing, especially affordable housing in a community, because it kind of scoops up a lot of the housing. So that's the number one concern probably for a community from a planning point of view, besides the nuisance of the other kinds of things that come up. There are cases where, fire life safety isn't well addressed if you have larger groups in a fairly small home and not good means of egress. So I know that there's some concerns. There's some, and then I don't know when they get kicked in for having to pay room and meals tax, but in essence, they're competing with other, businesses that are better set up for this kind of, like hotels, motels, that do pay rooms and meals tax. And, the town makes revenue, gets some of the revenue from that. So I think depending on how many days you rent it out, I don't know what the rules on that are. I don't necessarily think it's a priority issue for this year, but I wanted to bring it up as a something to keep an eye on.
I agree that, certainly in resort areas like North Conway, there's probably a lot of potential or incentive for people to buy single family homes and turn them into short-term rentals. There's a lot of income to be made there, frankly. And, I think from my understanding, other organizations that invest in traditional hotels, have to meet certain standards for, cleanliness and health and safety that, nobody enforces that with these, short-term rentals too. So, but at the same time, I think my neighbor had an accessory dwelling unit in their basement, and they were, the previous owners were doing Airbnb, and we never had a problem, or you never even noticed that they were there, honestly. So, it can work in some areas, but at the same time, it certainly would create a potential for a further shortage of workforce housing in the area.
Yeah. I guess the main reason why I bring this up is that the housing market's really changed because of COVID. The demand, we all know that there's huge demands for housing, and we don't really know. I think time will tell how many of them are going to become permanent residences versus rentals, shorter long-term rentals. So we'll keep an eye on it. But I just wanted to bring that up. All right. I don't think this is a high priority unless we start to hear that it is. But we do get questions, maybe something that people ask if they're looking to purchase a house, can I use it as an Airbnb? All right, the last big issue to talk about, and this is really, I think, something to consider and maybe just think about, and I'll ask you next month, what do you think? What's the answer? Currently, I interpret our ordinance to say you cannot have like an apartment building with more than 6 units because of the way we basically, going back to what John said, we allow single family, 2-family, and multi-family of 3 to 6 units. We don't specify that we don't define and specify anything more than that in our table of uses. And that's not going to say that's always been interpreted this uniformly throughout town over time, but that's currently where I think Scott and I would do the interpretation now in our roles. So we, again, the housing market's changed a lot. And this is, I think, something that the town put in probably years ago to try to prevent large apartment buildings, especially with the student population, is what I've heard is sort of the history behind it, but it might not work anymore. Okay. So, there's a real housing shortage. Building new units is really expensive. we're hearing a lot that the student rental market is changing because more students are living on campus. And actually, infill is kind of good planning. And I had a conversation just today with or yesterday, I guess it was, with a landlord that said, because of these changes in the market, obviously they need to fill their units, but they would just as soon have more year-round tenants. And they said that they would have no trouble finding it. But one of the problems they have is some of the buildings around town that are been geared more towards students have smaller kitchens and lots of bedrooms. And if family might want 2 bedrooms and more kitchen living area. So this person I talked to said that I can't remember if it was let's see, they have 3 apartments in one building. And this person said, and it's just, again, case by case, every building's different, but they could pretty easily convert it to 4 units. So they're not hitting that 6 unit yet, but say it was at 6 and they want to go to 7. And they said that it basically could end up reducing the occupancy of the building because they might just have 1 or 2 people per apartment on a year-round basis, rather than 3 or 4 in the apartments. And it would have fewer cars, they believed. So it might make the intensity and the use of the building not much different, or if anything, a little bit less, even though it might have 1 more unit in it. So I bring this up because I've had conversations with somebody else that is looking to maybe would like to make some reconfigure a building that already has 6 units, and they want to add more because of the space configuration. It makes more sense and it's financially better. And they feel like there's a big demand for a different type of configuration. So, again, this is something to think about. Why do we have that limit of 6? Does that really work for us anymore? And I think that's an area to kind of do some work with. So looks like Mike's got his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say my observations about the rentals. I had, in my 3-unit apartment house, I had an open apartment and I put it on Facebook Marketplace. I had 42 or 43 inquiries about it, contacting me with messages, and Craigslist, I think I had 12 or 11. So it was like over 50, when normally it might be 5 or 6 and one of the 5 or 6 takes it. But that was in a period of 3 days. I had 41 inquiries on that 1 2-bedroom apartment. I mean, my rents are pretty cheap compared to, maybe that was the reason, I don't know. But there's a huge influx of people from Laconia trying to get into the area. Maybe they're locked out of the apartments there. Huge demand right now. Plymouth is doing something right too.
So again, this would be something to consider for next year to help meet changing needs in the region. That thank you for sharing that, Mike, because I've heard this now, and you're the 3rd person. So again, it's about a matter of reaching out over the summer, having some conversations both with the larger student landlords and the smaller ones, and asking, and people that are renting to non-students too, to sort of say, what can we do to make this work better? And is it right to do it in every zone? It's going to be a complex one to sort of sort through, but I think we kind of have a responsibility to try to create some better affordable housing around too.
I apologize that I haven't been paying attention to people's hands up. I'm not used to this much civility in a Zoom meeting. So Steve, did you want to say something? I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to build on what Mike and Jen said. We're doing housing inventories and housing assessments for a couple communities, and according to New Hampshire Housing, the state of New Hampshire is now 20,000 units short. It's a staggering number.
Right.
Like what you're observing, Mike, doesn't surprise me, but it's interesting to hear that firsthand. How many people were inquiring about a unit because there's so few, and the cost continues to go up on units everywhere. If material prices are up and there are scarcity of units, if we can allow for a little bit more density, maybe it's just in certain zones where the board and the town feel it's most appropriate, but I think this is worth at least talking about some more.
So
I would, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. Go ahead.
I would agree with Steve. Because of that pressure on the units, our locals are getting priced out of the town, and it's really sad. And that's exactly what's happening in Laconia. There's just nowhere for people to live.
So the other thing that I observed on when we're talking about specifically about the limitation of 6 units per building, the second phase of the Fatherland Trust, that there is a proposal there to put 2 4-unit buildings next to each other. So there's not, even though there may be a limitation on more than 6 units in a building, there's not a limitation on putting multiple buildings with multiple units on a single parcel, as long as there's a site plan. And if it's treated that way, I think there's some flexibility for property developers to do that. And there's always the variance process too. If somebody really thinks that there's a market and they want to go to the ZBA for a variance for a building with 8 units, they can always do that.
Yeah, I can tell. I mean, you're right. That was not, there is that option to do multiple buildings with 6 or less units. It does add cost potentially.
Right.
So and that's something to consider. And then I did see now, forgot to mention this one, a conceptual plan with like a big apartment building. And I was like, well, you can't really do that. So, I think Matt had his hand up again, but now he took it down. So
I can't see people that are on the screen. So Matt, did you have comments?
I was just going to interject a comment. I'm researching building. I want to build a 4-unit rental myself. And in a lot of the research I've been doing, I find that from 4-unit to 5-unit, I know this conversation is based around 6 or plus more units. But the jump from 4 units, or the move from 4 units and less, or 5 units and more, boils a lot down to what I can tell is life safety devices, firewalls, and building code, where it really takes it from the residential aspect into the commercial aspect from that 4 to 5 difference of units.
I'm aware of some of those differences as well too.
So that adds cost too, but in the long run, it may make it a safer place too.
I think if we were to look at somewhere, I forget the development behind Fox Pond Park, those are probably 4 units per building, with multiple buildings with 4 units per building. But so I forget. There are a couple places around town that are exceptions to this for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, please keep thinking about it. That's all I've got for tonight.
All right. Thanks.
I'll try not to do too many more slides at other times. It is a way I can kind of share information, but if you guys find that too tedious, I'm happy to back off on that too.
I certainly appreciate the work that you're doing to summarize this and identify, the issues that you're finding. I think we have a responsibility as a board to summarize and tweak the zoning ordinance. If you have fresh eyes on it as an implementer, you're certainly in a position to recognize the opportunities for improvement. And I think that it would be fairly easy for us as a board to kind of summarize a lot of small changes and say, these are just minor tweaks that we feel are important in terms of making the current zoning ordinance more functional, and it would still have to be put to the voters. So is there any other discussion on this? Sue, go ahead.
I appreciate everything, all these slides and everything, and the information that you give, because you clearly have to deal with the public on a day-to-day basis. And we can listen to the news and we can listen to others and observe what we observe, but we don't have the inside information like you do. And it's current, it's what the needs of the people at that moment in time are. I think this housing and adding more apartments, right now we've got an influx of people because of this COVID, and you have to wonder in 5 years' time, are we going to all of a sudden have all these empty apartments because people are going to go back to where they came from? I don't know, nobody knows. But I think the information that you bring us is really very helpful, and thank you for doing that. And it just gives me a lot of stuff to think about.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I guess, and I think one thing I want to try to really do in my role here is do a better job, than I had in years back too, of just sharing that, like, kind of, this is what we heard this month, and these are, I mean, sometimes it's kind of, that's the fun of the job too. That's every day is different. We get new questions and concerns, and sometimes they can be good to laugh about too, when people have some crazy ideas. But yeah, but when you start hearing things over and over, it's kind of like, okay, this is something that maybe, is it just a fad or is it really a change? And then you start looking at planning literature and other communities and realizing, yeah, this is something that other communities are dealing with too. So maybe it's time for us to at least think about and be ready to, not necessarily this year, but in the future. So that's it for me. I've said plenty for tonight.
Thank you. June, sorry, Mary Ann, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick one. I too appreciate all the slides, but as I'm thinking through all the things you've been presenting tonight, I'm wondering if you're looking for us to set a priority. Are we just I agree, it seems like definitions are the first place to start, but are you looking for that sort of feedback? Does it just require more discussions in order to figure out the priorities?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that, Mary Ann. I mean, ideally, yeah, I'd love to have you guys give me your top 3 things to work on. At the same time, I realize I've thrown a lot of information out there, and you probably need some time to digest it. I always think that good planners start to drive around town or walk around town and get really obsessed by storage containers or fences, or apartments in a funny, good way, or parking, it just helps you guys to start thinking about that as you move around the community and, talk to people too, to get better feedback. I don't think the short-term rentals is a huge issue right now. I think the storage containers, maybe we can just bring that in under accessory structures for now, as an idea. And again, I want to try to keep it simple from the staff point of view too. If we make things really complex and add lots of things, we don't really have the resources to enforce it necessarily. So there's a balance there. As the community grows and changes too. So it's step by step. The first part is clean up some of the things we talked about, but I wanted to introduce some of these other newer uses. So I think the cleanup and the housing are the ones to kind of focus on. I think the housing is the more pressing one to decide which way you want to go with it.
June,
but
can you
I welcome your feedback too. Sorry, Mark.
That's okay. June, can you put those into a running document so that at some point, you do a couple more presentations and then we can go through and say, these are the 3 top priorities that we have based on your presentations?
Yeah, I can try to figure out a way to do that. And, I can send out my slides too. That's fine. I'll do that.
Maybe I don't know if you're a Google Doc user, but that's a pretty easy way to share things with people and then they can get in and read it. But just a suggestion.
Yep.
I'm going to move us on. And is there any other unfinished business that the other members of the board would like to bring up, or other business at this point? I'll move on from that. Are there other public comments? I know we've had comments throughout our discussion, but are there any other general public comments that anyone would like to contribute? Let's see, Matt Yetton and Henry Ahern are still on. Are there other members of the public that would like to contribute?
Matt has his hand up.
Go ahead, Matt.
I just want to say thank you for letting me speak and interject throughout tonight's session. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Good. I'm glad you contributed. It's good to have a diversity of ideas and opinions in the discussion. I'm glad we were able to incorporate those. Any other comments from the public? No. From the board? Hearing none, I'll entertain the last motion of the night.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mary Ann. Is there a second?
Second that.
Thanks, Sue. Motion to adjourn is non-debatable. So all those in favor, John?
Aye.
Mary Ann?
Aye.
Mike Ahern?
Aye.
Sue?
Aye.
Mary Ann?
Nope, aye again.
Steve?
Aye.
And Mike Bouchard?
Aye.
Right, and I will vote aye as well. Carl and Mark, thank you for, I apologize that I never reseated you, but we really didn't have anything to vote on at the end of the meeting. So have a good night, everybody.